This morning on the Ag Issues program, a pleasure, as always, to bring on to the program, as he has been doing for many years, Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the program this morning. Roger, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Just fine. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you as well. Let's get right to it. And the first is, I'm sure, well, we had it on our Ag News, but it was a national story as well concerning what we are looking at for the U.S. food supply and the threat of targeted attacks from China. Mm-hmm. And this is all based on, more than this, but based on the discovery of a fungus found at the Detroit airport last year. Mm-hmm. And that was for a researcher that works at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, Greg, not only works at the University of Michigan, but is funded by the CCP, and that's a real concern here. And the authorities that actually, a lot of the information I was able to dig out on this comes out of the 25-page complaint that has been filed against this person by the federal government, by the FBI and the Department of Justice. FBI did the investigation, and Department of Justice has filed the complaint. And that complaint notes the researcher's loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party and noted that also she had smuggled other pathogens on at least one prior occasion. So this is pretty scary stuff. That report, or actually that complaint, when you dig through that, it notes that the toxins involved in that fungus caused vomiting and liver damage and reproductive defects in both humans and livestock. And had that gotten out into the food supply and as well as into the livestock sector, that really could have created a lot of damage, a lot of havoc for quite some time, and would have been a real mess with respect to the food supply in this country.
Now, this is something I did not know concerning a particular law in China. And what this law specifically refers to, citizens on them spying for the CCP.
Yeah, I didn't know this either, Greg, until I was digging through that complaint. And there's a reference to it in the complaint. And sure enough, when I did further research and pulled it down, this is a law that China passed in 2017. It's the Chinese National Intelligence Law, or China's National Intelligence Law, that requires all citizens and organizations to support and cooperate with state intelligence efforts. And it's Article 7 of that law that is the key. That one says any organization or citizen shall support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work in accordance with the law. So they are obligating their citizens and any entities over there to assist their intelligence agencies when there's a legal request of them. And I think both you and I know, Greg, what happens if you refuse that request. You're not going to refuse it a second time. And Article 14 of that law grants intelligence agencies the authority to demand that support and assistance and cooperation from those organizations and citizens that have been requested. Now, it doesn't explicitly mandate that every citizen has to actively engage in espionage for the CCP, but it establishes a legal obligation to support intelligence activities when there is a lawful request. Now, read between the lines on what that means, and if you're doing government-funded research at a Chinese CCP government-funded research at a university in the United States, and there's a request that you do espionage or you steal technology or you create a pathogen that could be introduced in the food supply in the United States, and you don't do it, things are not going to turn out well for you.
Yeah, to say the least. And for everyone listening, let that sink in, what that law really states as well. So, Roger, I guess the question is, it poses how safe is the U.S. crop production and food supply system safe from attack?
Well, that's a good question, and we still have vulnerabilities. We've got a lot of government agencies that have roles to play in this, and they all have obligations, and there are some overlapping duties that they have. There are multiple layers of biosecurity, but there are still concerns about insider threats. And this is always the problem, Greg. If you have somebody that wants to take themselves out while they take something else out, how do you stop that? It's very difficult to do that. And we're subject to the risk of foreign actors introducing harmful pathogens and plant viruses. Well, one place to start on this is with imported food. So maybe you can stop the importation of products that are designed to cause a problem once they get over here. That's one thing, and we do have in this country quite an elaborate regulatory, pretty complex framework of laws designed to ensure public health and food safety and fair trade practices. And of course, the FDA and the USDA are at the center of that. And the USDA oversees about 80% of the food supply, including imported processed foods and seafood and dairy and fruits and vegetables. And we've got a complete labyrinth of laws governing that. But what we saw in this most recent event, Greg, was this was not dealing with imported food. We had a researcher that was in the United States and had smuggled this virus in that could cause problems for us. So there's your biosecurity concern right there. Now, we do have other avenues to catch those things, but this recent event, and as I mentioned earlier, this lady had mentioned she confessed that she had smuggled this in before because they found and then deciphered the messages she had sent back and forth with her boyfriend, saying that, well, it's safe, you can do this through the mail, and usually there's no problem. Wow, when I read that, it's just, oh my goodness, how often does this happen? And is this just the tip of the iceberg, and where are we at? But there is a whole nother set of laws that we have dealing with biosecurity, but there are lapses in the system, and that's a problem for us. And we've got synthetic biology, global trade. This all increases the complexity of defending the food supply. And when you get also the structure of agriculture that we have in this country of high concentration, particularly in the livestock sector, where you get thousands and perhaps millions of animals or birds in small areas, one little event can wipe out a bunch in just a small time frame. And so that high concentration is a problem. Now, on the other side, it's also hard to regulate something that is spread out and is very diverse. So we've got both aspects of that in agriculture, and our government officials have to be very vigilant in protecting from this whole system from these types of attacks and threats.
And that, you talked about imported food, but almost the same can be said for what we produce here on our own. The food that's produced here in the U.S. too. Yeah,
and that's what we're dealing with in this situation. Is this didn't have anything to do with respect to imported food. The threat was already here, and the only question is, can it be stopped before it enters the food supply system or some type of supply chain? Unfortunately, they got this one. But I don't think you and I know or understand, Greg, how serious the threat is and how close we may have been in not only in this situation but in other situations to something that could really create a lot of harm for the food supply in the United States.
Oh, I can only imagine probably how many incidents we've never heard of, more than likely, to be able to do. How important or how crucial, maybe the better way to put it, are record-keeping requirements throughout all of this food production and everything else?
Oh, record keeping at the farm level, biosecurity measures, background checks, personnel checks, very, very important. And Greg, this feeds into the visa issue that the administration is dealing with right now at universities. Are we double checking, triple checking those visas in the background of the people that are issued visas to work here in this country? We're going to have to up the vigilancy with respect to that because they're all tied together here. And people are familiar with reports coming out of Harvard. Obviously, there are international students that are graduate students in major research universities, and we want them. But Harvard has 27% of all of their students that are international students. That is an incredibly high number, and they have to be here on visas. Well, we better be careful with respect to people that are funded by the CCP that are over here. It's difficult to understand, and I struggle with this myself. Why it's hard for us to understand that there are people in the world that hate us and want to destroy us. We don't want to think that way. We just don't live our lives that way, and particularly in agriculture, we think the best of other people. But we really can't in this situation, and we just have to be vigilant to make sure if somebody is here doing research, they're doing legitimate research, not research to take us out.
And I guess you can literally think of it, all it takes is one time that a pathogen or whatever the case may be gets into our food supply, and then we suffer the consequences, for lack of a better term.
That's right. Yep.
Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, will be our guest, or is our guest this morning. And let's just go back to something simple here. Swampbuster laws and rules and everything else. Okay, I say that very facetiously, but we had the latest as far as news that involved Swampbuster rules this past week.
Yeah, we did, Greg. In late May, we had a federal trial court judge in Iowa that upheld the Swampbuster regulations against a constitutional challenge. And what you had here was a farmer in eastern Iowa that bought a 71-acre tract to add to his other acreage that he farmed. So it was just a piece to his farming corporation's total operation. And 21 acres of that was forested, and 9 acres of that the USDA determined were wetlands subject to the Swampbuster rules, which means that he can't remove the trees, remove the woody vegetation, as the regs say, and then farm it and receive government subsidies for that. Now, there was no water on the area at any time of the year. There never is. And the trees, it was demonstrated, the trees could be removed and the ground farmed without the need for drainage tile. Now, this is eastern Iowa. If you don't need drainage tile, it's not wet. Almost all the ground in Iowa that is tillable ground is going to be tile drained, but this one didn't need it. But the USDA made a determination that it was subject to the Swampbuster rules, and so he made various constitutional claims, including a taking claim, and they promulgated their reg wrong concerning woody vegetation. And he lost on all of his constitutional claims. Now, the thing, Greg, that I find interesting about this is the case is appealable to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. Well, what happened in another case coming out of South Dakota, which is also part of the Eighth Circuit, is there was a farmer there in southeastern South Dakota that was making the same claim. He lost all the way through. It got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court kicked it back to the Eighth Circuit to say, you better try again because we've repealed Chevron deference, the Chevron case, and the Swampbuster rules were developed under that type of deference, and that no longer applies. And then the Eighth Circuit kicked that back to the trial court in South Dakota. So that case is still out there on whether the Swampbuster regs are even valid. But here the Iowa trial court jumped ahead of that and ruled against the farmer, which puzzles me. I would have thought they would have held this until the South Dakota case is reevaluated and we get another judgment out of that one based on the change in the law at the Supreme Court level. So we'll see what happens, but another Swampbuster case winding its way through the courts.
It's probably too numerous to count of how many different turns and back and forth on the Swampbuster rules you've seen throughout the years.
Oh, my goodness. Since Swampbuster came in 85, if I were to categorize the cases in my treatise, I've got the footnote on Swampbuster and these related issues takes up 3/4 of a page in 10-point font.
Man.
Yeah, it's a bunch, a full page of just nothing but citations.
Wow, I didn't realize it was 40 years since Swampbuster rules came out.
85 Farm Bill.
Yeah.
85 Farm Bill.
All right. One final thing we want to talk about, self-employment tax. And we've got some developments there as well.
Yeah, this one, people may not realize the impact of this at the farm level because this involves a hedge fund in New York City. But been watching, there's a trilogy of cases there, and now 2 of them have been decided. We still have one involving Steve Cohen, who is the majority owner of the New York Mets, and he's going to lose his case too if he doesn't settle. But I've been talking about these for quite some time. What this involves is the creation of what we call a manager-managed LLC, where I create an LLC, for example, for my farming operation. I designate someone to have the managerial interest, and then others are just basically limited partners. And so other than my guaranteed payment, if I receive a distribution of the earnings out of that, then that's not subject to self-employment tax because I'm not the designated manager. Now, the problem with that for these hedge funders is they can't do that. The statute is pretty clear. The Internal Revenue Code is clear that this doesn't apply to service businesses, this exemption. We can do it for our farm clients if we do it correctly and follow the regulations, but these people don't. And this is the right result. Actually, there were $140 million worth of distributions that they were trying to avoid self-employment tax on in this. And the court said, no, you can't, because they were actually these limited partners, which are prominent investors. And if I were to mention the names, people might recognize them if they're into finance and those types of things. They were treating it as a full-time job. They were managing the operation. All the advertising says that, you invest in this fund, you get the expertise of these people. Well, when you do that, your distribution is going to be subject to self-employment tax because you're, in essence, functionally acting as a manager of the operation. And that was the key to this. What are you functionally doing rather than any state law designation of your interest? But we can do this for our farm clients if we do it right. It's just that these types of operations can't do it because that's the way the regulations, that's the way the code and the regulations work on this. So kind of a big deal on self-employment tax. And I think the IRS now has indicated that they're going to finalize their regulations. And this is one of the things I teach at the seminars I do across the country, explaining to CPAs and attorneys that we can do this for our farm clients. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and you have to be careful to fit it within the regs. But these guys are learning kind of the hard way on the East Coast that this doesn't apply to them.
If we do it right is the key.
That's right.
in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think just doing part because, well, like Steve Cohen and them said, they're gonna stand to lose a fair chunk of money on this.
Yeah, and Steve Cohen at stake. There's about $350 million in that case. So I think he better be. Hopefully, his attorneys are telling him that he needs to settle.
Do it, yeah.
He's going to lose.
Most definitely. All right, Roger, we're out of time, but as always, people can go to your Substack, go to your website to get more information.
Go to my website. These are on the blog, and you can find that through my website. You can also find it on Ag Manager at K-State.
All right, sounds good. Roger, as always, appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg.
That is Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us this morning on the Ag Issues program here on 580 WIBW.